Welcome back to Thersites' Politics After Dark. This week we're going to be looking at partisan propaganda from both sides of the aisle. A couple weeks ago I was browsing the selection of audiobooks on Libby and I decided to download onto my phone two pieces of propaganda, one pro-Hillary, the other one anti-Hillary. It amazes me still how many books have been written about the Clintons, and I figured, well, the longer I wait to do something like this, the more irrelevant Hillary will become, so why not go ahead and strike while the iron isn't quite room temperature. So, the first book we'll be looking at is Cynthia Levinson's Hillary Rodham Clinton, Do All the Good You Can. This book came out in January of 2016, right as the primary voting was starting for the nomination fight that year. Of course, that ended up being a very close primary fight, or at least much closer than expected, between Hillary and Bernie Sanders. So just some general comments on what this book is before we then go into the pros and cons. So Cynthia Levinson, I believe, is a retired teacher. She usually tries to write her books on about a middle school level, but at the same time introduce fairly complex ideas, and you can definitely see that here. This is something which is written simply, but I wouldn't say it dumbs things down too much, considering that she's aiming for about a 6th or 7th grade level. You also see some of her other titles here, so she will explore issues that kids might need to know. This is also the kind of stuff that's written just well enough that an adult could pick it up and not be too embarrassed about having to learn from it. Levinson is somebody who is not afraid of a little bit of controversy, so apparently her book about the Constitution, for instance, calls for certain changes because she says that a lot of what's in the Constitution is outdated. And in general, having experienced this work, I do appreciate her skill as a writer. I think that she is fairly skillful at what she does. Same thing is true of the other person I picked, by the way, and I was surprised in both instances that both of these people who were engaged in some fairly partisan activity were a bit more talented than I would have guessed. Now, the other thing to keep in mind about this piece is that it will, of necessity, probably not go into the kind of lurid details one might expect because, again, it is aimed at 12 or 13-year-olds, so keep that in mind. And so now let's transition into the main part of this review where we look at the pros and cons of this biography of Hillary Clinton and also talk about some of the major kind of themes that are at play here. Let me begin by saying what I thought this book was going to be when I just saw the cover and read the title. I assumed that this was going to be a hagiography for boomer women. I've met a lot of women who are hardcore Hillary supporters who relate to her, and they are women of a certain age demographic who just idolize her. And I figured based on the title, that's what I'm about to see. And then I read that it was a middle school level book, so I figured, okay, this is a book designed to translate Hillary to basically, I guess at the time, very young millennials, so the youngest of the millennials who are not of age yet, and then the oldest of Gen Z. So this is aimed at people who are not quite of age, so that way they understand why their aunts and grandmothers and, I guess in some cases, mothers are so excited about Hillary Clinton. So that's kind of what I expected. And I also assumed it was aimed at young females rather than young men. I still feel that characterization is true. That being said, even though I was expecting this to be pretty damn bad, it was a lot better than I thought it would be. One thing that really gave me a negative impression early on as I began to get through this book was one of the early lines was it listed all the offices Hillary Clinton held going into 2016, and then said, how is it possible for one person to achieve so much? Is she superhuman? Well, yes, but also no. And so that line made me feel like I'm about to get some heavy-duty propaganda. But actually, the propaganda here was a lot more limited than I thought it would be, which is not a bad thing necessarily. The subtitle, Do All the Good You Can, is a reference to Hillary Clinton's Methodist faith. And so one of the major themes that Levinson explores in this book is the idea that Hillary always adhered to Methodist theology. Famously, John Wesley said, do all the good you can for all the people you can in every way you can, or something along those lines. And so Hillary's religiosity comes up over and over. And of course, this is something that Democrats always try to push, the idea that it's not just the Republicans who are believers, but we too are pious. And so this idea comes up a lot. And also we see Bill Clinton praying quite a bit as well. So this is one of the major themes. Now, let's just jump right in. Oh, the other thing that kind of we feel here is that this has a little bit of an insider track. So the author refers in a familiar fashion to Hillary Land, which is the group of people who are Hillary advisors and followers, and she seems to follow them in some way. Now, she's not a reporter, so she doesn't have that kind of inside track. I don't think she's a major political activist either. So in this case, Levinson is writing from a kind of partisan fan perspective, but an informed partisan fan. She also talks about how she also has the words "Ready for Hillary," the 2016 slogan, and I believe that also the phrase "It's her turn." So there was this feel of inevitability at the beginning of the book and then toward the end, but I feel like she does lead that sort of excitement that she personally has aside for most of the book. So again, praise where praise is due there. Now, in terms of the good points in the book, I would say it's written simply, but it's also clear. And I would say this is for young readers, but not dumb readers. So, for instance, if she does use a big word, and she'll use it in a context where the meaning is clear, so long as you have at least some intelligence and you can kind of figure out from the context what it means. So that's a pretty good way to do that. It introduces the kids to new words without confusing them. So good on you for that. Again, she's a former teacher, so it makes sense she would do that well. She also does a good job of contextualizing Hillary's life and career. So she'll explain, for instance, what it was like growing up in the era Hillary grew up in the 50s. Like how people dressed back then, or what careers were available to women, things of that nature. So that's also an interesting thing to do because a lot of kids reading the book would have no idea. And so she just explains it from the ground up. For the most part, I would say the biography of Hillary is good, and it also doesn't go into too much detail, but it goes into enough detail that you have a pretty good feel of who Hillary Clinton is and why she matters. And I'd say that the quality of this biography is very high up until at least 1995 or so. And it also does a good job of trying to get inside of Hillary Clinton's head and explain her attitude. And one other thing that's pretty nice about it is it doesn't at any point deny that she always was calculating and ambitious. So Levinson does not try to church that up at all. So that part of her coverage I really do like, because I think that is the real Hillary Clinton, someone who is very calculating and ambitious and not really embarrassed by that in the way that most people kind of are. Now, she also does a pretty good job of discussing some of the right-wing attacks on the Clintons, and also how Hillary herself, despite being on the receiving end of so many attacks, still has a certain level of love for the Republican Party and a lot of its beliefs because she grew up as a Republican. Now, Levinson doesn't talk about her being a Goldwater girl, but I assume a lot of that is because she didn't want to have to explain who Barry Goldwater was. And again, this is a fairly short book, so that kind of makes sense, but I guess in an ideal world, she would have explained the Goldwater girl stuff a little more. But she does at least make it clear that Hillary always did have some regard for the Republican Party. She grew up in that party. Her dad was a Republican. Her favorite teacher was a Republican. So she does at least give enough context that, you know, some kid who might have read this book would understand why somebody on the left, if they would say Hillary's too conservative, they would at least be able to sort of comprehend where they're coming from. So that part was pretty well done. There's also fairly judicious coverage of Vince Foster and a few of the other more ridiculous scandals that surround the Clintons, where they were accused of murdering him and burying him in a grave somewhere when he committed suicide. So that, and I guess Whitewater and some of the other scandals that were just blown way out of proportion. It also does a good job of pointing out how the Ken Starr investigations were very much a witch hunt, where they were looking for a crime. They already had decided the Clintons were guilty. They were just looking for the crime to pin on them. So, a special prosecutor was around pretty much, I guess, from the time Republicans took Congress in 94 until they eventually stumbled upon the Monica situation. It also does a decent job of explaining, the Monica thing from Hillary's perspective, where Hillary knew that Bill ran around, but at the same time, Bill assured her that the Monica rumors were false. And so Hillary went on TV and said they were false and it was just a right-wing conspiracy. And then she was fucking furious when she found out that Bill lied to her. And I think that sounds about right. I mean, Bill Clinton is the kind of guy to lie about stuff like that. And, as somebody who cared about her own public image, not just as first lady, but as a potential future politician, I mean, yeah, she's going to be fucking bad about that because that affects her credibility. Now, when it comes to the downsides, while it's not quite a hagiography, it has some of the markings of one. Everything that Hillary would say in her defense during the 2016 primary cycle is kind of here, just in a less dramatic or entitled way. And so every claim that she might make to defend herself against charges from either the left or the right is here. Clearly, based on the way this biography is structured, Levinson assumes that all of the challenges will be from the right. So she probably thinks, like most Hillary supporters did, that this primary is a foregone conclusion and that no one could possibly want anybody else because Hillary is the most qualified candidate to ever live. Of course, it also claims that being First Lady is really significant experience, which I believe is still a bullshit argument at best. One other thing that I really didn't like about this book is that while Levinson is honest about the fact that Hillary Clinton is a hawk, she either downplays or dismisses the consequences of that hawkishness and acts as if, well, yeah, she's a hawk, she has to prove she's tough. I mean, obviously, right? That's the correct way to be. And effectively, if Hillary is a hawk, then being a hawk has merit. So that's kind of an attitude that I really feel is maybe Levinson putting her personal love of Hillary above what might be best or what the public wants. And I guess to be fair, the results of the 2016 cycle weren't in yet, so people weren't quite clear yet on exactly how anti-war the public was becoming. And Levinson also downplays the importance of the Iraq War vote for the 2008 primary. She effectively says it made a big difference, but it was kind of a bullshit reason for people to think that Obama had better judgment than Hillary. I mean, what else did they have to go on, though? Not only that, but again, if Hillary's disposition is to be hawkish, that shouldn't be a pass. She should still be self-aware and think things through. And she didn't. Or the other part that I really thought was bizarre, so Hillary's, calling card, both in this biography and by every account that's pro-Hillary, is that Hillary's someone known for meticulously doing her homework. And the reason why she voted for the Iraq War is that she didn't do her homework, and the way Levinson presents it is this is a completely acceptable excuse for getting that wrong. But if that's what Hillary's supposed to be good at, doing her homework to override any bad instincts, and then she didn't do that when it mattered the most, I feel like that kind of is a fucking black mark. She also fails to acknowledge that when Hillary grows into a compromiser, and this is a thing she takes great pride in, by the way, Hillary in this case is the one taking pride in it, that this means not just getting bills passed, but getting bad bills passed. No Child Left Behind, or the Patriot Act. Those are things that happened during Hillary's time in the Senate. And those are bills that we're still paying the price for today. And just because she managed to become friends with Trent Lott and prove to Trent Lott that she's a Christian or whatever the fuck, I don't necessarily think that any of that makes up for the fact that her education system has been destroyed. The other thing was, there was a bit of bullshit about Hillary's campaign to be senator from New York. The way Levinson portrays it is that people begged her, New Yorkers were begging Hillary to come to New York and be their senator. What she really should say is that Hillary wanted to have a platform to launch herself and she wanted to be in one of the wealthiest states with the most links to Wall Street. And then there were people on Wall Street who wanted her to do that. And then there were basic bitch kind of Democrat types who wanted a big name senator from New York. Kind of like the Knicks always want to get the best free agents. So it was not a matter of her being called upon by the masses as a savior, because supposedly she had to go there and save them from Rudy Giuliani being elected senator. But even though Rudy Giuliani was a popular mayor, he's a Republican in New York. He's not getting elected to the fucking Senate. Let's be real, that's not happening. Unless whoever was put against him was a complete fuck-up, he's not getting elected to the Senate. By 2000, New York was bluer than the balls of, I guess, Bill in regard to what he was getting out of Hillary. You know, it's not happening, okay? Now, when we get to the 2008 primary, one of the funniest parts of the book that made me laugh out loud, and people probably thought I was insane because I was walking around with my headphones in listening to this shit, Levinson will praise Hillary Clinton for dragging the 2008 primary out to the bitter end, even after it was clear that she mathematically had no path to beat Obama. And the reason why this was praiseworthy is because it showed her resolve, I guess, and her loyalty to her workers, or it showed that she wanted to send a message to Obama that it wasn't okay that he might have said some sexist stuff. I'm not sure exactly, but basically she says, yes, there was a lot of personal animosity between the two of them that they had to squash after the primary, and that it was totally cool that she dragged it out because it gave people the right to vote or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, of course, in 2016, when Hillary had the advantage and they were already counting superdelegates ahead of time, they ran really condescending ads about Bernie Sanders' math and basically said that Bernie doesn't understand math and he should drop the hell out. So that argument got turned on its head, and Hillary's great persistence became Bernie's stubborn idiocy and sexism. Now, there are details here where we can see that the Clintons became fabulously wealthy after not growing up that way, and then only being sort of middle class or upper middle class when they were lawyers. We see, for instance, that Chelsea Clinton had a 2-day wedding. You have to be rich as fuck to have a 2-day wedding. And so that happened when Hillary was Secretary of State. So where did the money come from? That's kind of an important question. And the answer, of course, is that there was some significant corruption. But effectively, they never portray it that way. Levinson is not bothered by the fact that Hillary takes corporate campaign donations. There's no mention of money in politics or inequality, really. It's just the idea that Hillary was learning to play the game and was a sort of moderate, pragmatic type person. We also never get any indication as to the implications of Hillary's foreign policy as Secretary of State. So she does mention that her time there was controversial. She didn't have any major signature treaties or anything, but effectively Levinson says that Hillary used smart power effectively and that it set the stage for future successes. Okay, sure, whatever. I mean, compared to the foreign policy we have right now, I guess Hillary Clinton looks like a goddamn genius by comparison. But, you know, to say that, well, she has no signature achievements, but still she's one of the best ever. No, that's not how the best ever would be defined by any reasonable person. And then finally, we know from Levinson that it's really important to Hillary's identity as a politician that she campaigned on healthcare in 1993 as First Lady, and then even in 2008 in the primary against Obama, she was for a single-payer system, whereas Obama was for the public option. And then going into 2016, she basically fully abandoned that. Well, why? Well, the reason is a thing that Cynthia Levinson won't acknowledge, and that's the role of money in politics. So anyway, as far as propaganda goes, this isn't bad, but let's be clear, there's still some significant propaganda. There are still some significant gaps in what you would know about Hillary Clinton. So that is the pro-Hillary account. Next time we'll look at the anti-Hillary book. Peace out, everybody.